Hi everyone. In this presentation, I'm going to be talking about the volcanic edifices in the Philippines, particularly their morphometric classifications, their distributions, and a possible evolutionary trend for volcanoes in the Philippines. With me in this work are Dr. Pablo Gross of CONICET in Argentina, Dr. Gareth Fabro, who was initially in Singapore when this work started, and who is currently with me at Caraga State University in the Philippines. This work was part of my postdoctoral research in VUB in Brussels, working with Dr. Mathieu Kerbang. We would like to thank our funders, the Belgian Federal Science Policy Office, and the Balik Scientist Fellowship that was granted by the Philippine Department of Science and Technology. So in this work, we try to tackle two questions related to volcano morphology. The first being, how does the morphology of volcanoes change through time? And given the availability of high-resolution imageries that covers a lot of the volcanoes on Earth, what quantitative information can we extract from describing the morphology of volcanoes? So in this work, we are interested with the volcanoes in the Philippines because the Philippines is in an ideal tectonic setting for volcanism. So in this work, we use the 30-meter resolution digital elevation models from the Shuttle Radar Topography mission. We also added some features including rivers and roads because we know that these features these surface features are patterned or shows radial patterns on the volcano edifices. We also defined volcanoes as conical topographic features where their base is outlined along the break-in slopes. So having said that, excluded in the definition of the base are the long run-out deposits of lahars, pyroclastic flows, and debris avalanches. Whenever observable, we also delineated the summit of the volcanoes. The summit can be a summit crater or a summit opening. So a summit crater are those that are created by eruptions, and the summit openings in this work are defined to be caused or formed by erosion or volcano collapse. In this work, we also considered individual edifices. So as you can see in this figure, whenever we have parasitic cones or overlapping edifices that are growing on top of larger stratovolcanoes, each of these will be considered as individual entities. So they will have their own quantitative descriptions. So, as you can see here, this is the map of the Philippines. Now, the Philippine tectonics is controlled by opposing subduction zones. As you can see on the west, you have Manila, Negros, Sulu, and Cotabato trenches that have eastward vergence, and you have the Philippine Sea Plate that is subducted obliquely along the East Luzon and Philippine trenches. Now, in this work, we have identified a total of 731 edifices. The larger volcanoes are distributed in 9 volcanic regions, here written in white. The smaller edifices are distributed in 8 volcanic regions. 2 of them are here, Macolod and Labo, and 5 out of the 8 are in Mindanao, including Basilan, Zamboanga, Upi, Lanao, Maramag, and Makaturing. So in this work, we used MORVOL, which is an IDL-based code, in order to generate the quantitative description of each of the edifices. So using the input from the SRTM, DEM, and the outlined bases and summit if they are available, MORVOL will create descriptions of the size of the base, the size of the summit, and the overall size of the volcano. It also has plan shape, truncation, and a description about the slope of the volcano. We also used R statistical program language Here we employed hierarchical classification by principal components in order to classify the volcanic edifices. So here written in bold, as you can see here, these are the largest contributions of each variable to the first 4 PCs, because in this case we only consider to have 4 principal components. In blue, we have positive these parameters will have positive contributions. In red, they have negative contributions. So this table shows you that PC1 was able to explain 52% of the variability, and PC1 is a description mostly of the edifice size, as you can see, including the irregularity. PC2 is mostly a description of the steepness or the slope. PC3 includes a description of the irregularity, truncation, as well as the size of the summit of the edifices. PC4, it includes description of the elongation and the truncation. Now these 4 plots, these are plots of the PCs. So here, for example, you have the plot of PC1, which is mostly the size and the irregularity of the edifices with or against the slope. And then you have the size and irregularity of volcanoes plotted against irregularity, truncation, and size, which is described in PC3. Here you have the plot of elongation against the slope, and here you have the plot of elongation against the irregularity, truncation, and summit size. So using these plots, we decided that for the volcanoes in the Philippines, they might be able to be classified into 4 classes. So here you have in red, so these green and red are smaller volcanoes, and they can be specifically classified into small flat cones. In green are the small steep cones, you have large cones here, and you have the massives. Now this figure shows you the distribution of silica content for each class. So mostly here you have monogenetic cones. So the small flat cones mostly have basaltic, scoria cones, and silicic domes. The small steep cones you have basalts and andesites, and in the large cones you have basaltic andesite. And for us, this suggests that the edifice growth is accompanied by an evolution of the average magma composition, which perhaps in turn suggests that the increase in load of larger edifices can lead to a greater degree of magma differentiation. If you look at large cones, you also have here dacite and rhyolites. And in massives, you have basalts, basaltic andesites, and andesites. This suggests that perhaps when volcanoes start to erupt dacites and rhyolites, they will have the tendency to have an explosive eruption, and in that case, they will form calderas. So in that case, these kinds of volcanoes will not be able to evolve into massives. Now this slide shows you a possible evolutionary trend for volcanoes here in the Philippines. So we say that initially volcanoes in the Philippines can either grow as or can either be formed as small steep cones or small flat cones. The polygenetic small steep cones can develop into large cones, and some of the large cones can evolve into massives. Now you see here on top the topographical cross-section for representative volcanoes for each of the classes. And please take note that the massive is represented by half a scale compared to the different classes, the other classes, sorry. So here we can say that based on the morphometric data, we can say that massives in the Philippines, they are the largest in terms of basal area and volume, but their height they're almost as high as large cones. And perhaps this tells us that at certain mature thresholds, volcanoes grow laterally than vertically. Also, to keep the volcano stable, while they are growing volume-wise, so to keep them stable, they also have to be dominantly growing laterally. We've also observed that for massives, especially, and for some of the large cones, they do not have single restricted summits, but instead they have extensive plateaus with multiple vents. And we attribute this to the fact that as they grow laterally, the location of the vents also change, or through time, erosion also plays a role in making the edifices more irregular. We've looked at the distribution of the different classes of volcanoes in the Philippines. Here is the figure wherein you also have the thickened crust that was modeled by Paguicanetal et al. In 2020. And here we can say that a lot of the large cones and most of the massives in the Philippines are located in the thickened crust. And you can see that here in Negros, as well as in West Luzon, where they are located just at the edge of the thickened crust. We also looked at the distribution of small volcanoes in volcanic fields. So this is important because we were trying to find out what's the or how are these small volcanoes being formed at the beginning and what influenced their formation. So here you have Basilan. So the circle that you see here, this is the location of Basilan volcanic field. There's 149 volcanoes mapped in Basilan. We also used 3-point alignment to figure out if the volcanic centers in Basilan are forming alignments. And we tried to find out if they have a preferred alignment. So most of the alignments or the volcanoes in Basilan, they are aligned, at least 3 of these volcanoes are aligned roughly east-west. The shape of the volcanic field, here represented in blue, actually it's the same stripe or orientation as this ellipse as well. It also coincides to the Sulu Trench. Now this tells us that the alignments can be attributed to the ascent of magma along pre-existing crustal structures and reactivated faults. Now we look at Lanao. Lanao has 50 small volcanoes and 17 alignments. So Lanao shows 2 preferred alignment directions. For strike-slip environments such as Lanao, the northeast-southwest here alignment is along tectonic features, which means that the magma ascended via extension fractures and strike-slip faults. Now the other preferred alignment, this can be attributed from the rotation of the stress field or the development of the flower structures within the releasing or the restraining bands of the strike-slip faults that are in this area. Lastly, we look at Macolod volcanic field. In Macolod volcanic field, we can say that the ascending magma, it takes advantage of the cross faults that are at high angle to the rift orientation. So the alignment of volcanoes for the Macolod volcanic field are mostly controlled by the normal fault system and the strike-slip faults from the localized extension in this area. So in conclusion, actually there is a paper version of this presentation. This is impressed in JVGR. So this work, the main contribution of this work is that it gives a database of the morphometric characteristics of Philippine volcanoes. And although we tried to follow a systematic method in identifying the volcanoes, we might have misidentified or left out some of the edifices. And just like any databases that we have at the moment, we do hope that through time, this database will also improve. We've also classified these volcano edifices into 4 classes. And we also presented a possible evolutionary trend for volcanoes in the Philippines, wherein they can start to form as either small flat cones or small steep cones. The polygenetic small steep cones can grow into large cones, and some of the large cones can grow into massives. However, the more evolved and explosive magma may cause more silicic volcanoes to be less steep, especially when they create calderas, than the andesitic ones. Also, we showed that the largest volcanoes in the Philippines are located on the thickened crust, and that the small volcanoes in the 8 volcanic fields, I presented 3 here, in the volcanic fields in the Philippines, they are influenced by local as well as regional stresses and pre-existing faults or structures. And I think that's it. Thank you for listening.